If you want to find one of these Bibles, we're on page 656. Okay, you're very welcome to join me there. And that's where we'll be kicking off from this morning. And as you'll see, it's a pretty unusual book. It's, as far as Bible books go, it kind of stands out by being unlike any other one. Each book is unique in its own right, but this has a distinct feel and flavor to it, which I trust you'll recognize as we go through. And we'll see it's pretty current, despite the fact that it's actually 3,000 years old. So let's jump in at verse 1, shall we? So this is, we think, probably King Solomon speaking, David's son. And we'll see something of his story as we go through this chapter. So, chapter 2, verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. And so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. And then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So I turned to consider wisdom, and madness, and folly. For what can man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. And I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. And this also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat, or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he is given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that in this lies glorious treasure and wonders that stun and shake and transform lives and societies and nations. And I pray, Lord, that your word would be heard in our hearts this morning. Not that we'd merely consider these thoughts, but that you would speak and that you would change and shape us with your truth. So I pray for your help in speaking and for your help in each one here in hearing. We invite you, Holy Spirit, to come and bring these things to life in our hearts in your own unique way. And we pray that you'd guide and lead our time, that it will bring glory to your name. In Jesus' name I pray. I just want to encourage each of you to take a moment, if you're willing, to try and invite God to speak to you this morning. Do your best to open your heart, regardless of where you stand with God presently. I'd encourage you, do your best to open your heart to God and invite him to speak to you this morning. Amen. Amen. Well, welcome, as I said, on this most happy of days to this most unusual of books. Some of you on me reading that out were probably thinking, sounds a bit glum. This Solomon chap doesn't sound like he was too happy. Sounds like he had an opportunity to be pretty happy. He's got lots of opportunities here, and yet he sounds somehow strangely glum about the whole thing. Well, why is that? You could call this whole thing his hunt for happiness, his search for satisfaction. Solomon, as Graham helpfully said earlier on in the meeting, he kind of preached most of my sermon for me, which was great, so thanks, Graham. Solomon goes off on this journey exploring all these different avenues to try and find where is fulfillment. It's interesting, this book fits in the wisdom category in the Bible. There's different sections of literature in the Bible. This is in the wisdom literature. And you may know the story of Job. And Job suffers more than anyone else in history until Christ comes, really. He goes through extraordinary, untold suffering. Solomon's story here, if it is indeed Solomon, in Ecclesiastes, is kind of the opposite. Job experienced suffering to the nth degree. Solomon experiences pleasure to the nth degree. They both end up in the wisdom category because they both have important things to teach us. And there's this extraordinary kind of journey into, okay, well, what does life have to offer? He searches on one thing after another, trying to find where is the kind of thing that's going to connect and make me think, okay, there's the missing piece of the puzzle. Now it works. Now I'm satisfied. Now I get it. You know, toasters are made to toast. What are humans made to do? What's my point? What's my purpose? It must be somewhere. And so he gives himself to this extravagant journey, trying to find where does fulfillment lie. And really, he looks into every conceivable avenue available with virtually limitless resources to discover exactly what life has to offer. This is a guy who has more of a chance to explore it than anyone else ever has in history. He is king of Israel at the time of their zenith, their golden era, when really, for a brief spell, Israel was somewhat dominant on the world stage, kind of the world superpower. So he's got phenomenal resources at his fingertips. There's no one wealthier, no one more powerful. He can explore anything and everything. And so he does. And so he says in verse 1, I said in my heart, come now, I'll test you with pleasure. We saw what he was exploring last week in chapter 1. That's on the YouTube channel if you want to look at it, or just read the chapter later on. But here we go. Okay, next step in his journey. I'm gonna test you with pleasure. Okay, previously we're looking at certain other ideas, but now it's like, okay, what's available out there in terms of pleasures? Well, he's going to make some interesting discoveries. And it's fascinating just to recognize that despite the fact this is a 3,000-year-old text, it speaks straight to our present day context. It's got incredible relevance for us because basically the avenues he explores are the same avenues that we explore today to look for fulfillment, as you'll see. Okay? So the first avenue that he explores is, you could say, the party avenue. Okay? He goes to the party. So he says, I'll test you with pleasure. Verse 2, I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? He begins to host these enormous, extravagant parties, and you kind of see comedy. He brings comedy, and he's exploring laughter. Okay, let's get some jesters in. Let's get some comedians in. Come on, make me laugh. You know, if you're searching for happiness, well, who's happier than people who are laughing? So he goes to all the comedy clubs, effectively. He brings in all the most funny people in the nation and has them make him laugh. And his conclusion is that it's mad. And of pleasure, what use is it? Yeah, okay, well, that was fun. I enjoyed, listening to Peter Kay or whoever it is who kind of, tickles your funny bone. And he's kind of like, yeah, this is fun. But at the end of it, it was all kind of like, all right. It wasn't that satisfying. It's interesting how many examples you can point to for evidence that hilarity and humor can often prove ultimately hollow. I remember being so shocked when I was a kid when I discovered that apparently John Cleese needed therapy. Because you think, well, he's hilarious. Surely he must be really happy because he's so funny. And actually, the funny thing is that the more therapy he got, the less funny he became, some people would say. It's like his humor was rooted in his angst. And it's quite often these comedians actually, you'd think, well, they must be happy, laughing all the time, causing laughter all the time. But it doesn't take long to think of examples. Robin Williams, genius, tragically took his own life. Just such a sad story. Matthew Perry, the man in the 90s most famous in the world for making people laugh, probably. In his autobiography, which he called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, big terrible thing referring to addiction, he acknowledged making people laugh didn't satisfy his soul, which is why the big terrible thing began to come into his life. He needed drugs, he needed substance abuse to try and give him enough of a buzz, because making thousands, millions, billions perhaps of people laugh didn't fill his heart. So you think, okay, well, evidently that's not the solution. And so, well, maybe the substance abuse is what's next, and it is what's next for Solomon. Verse 3, I searched my heart to cheer my body with wine. All right. Well, maybe laughter wasn't enough. I'll go and get good and drunk. Those people, they seem to be having a good time. I'll explore that. And so he really gets stuck in. Now, we can perhaps easily recognize that the tragic world of alcoholism is obviously desperately sad. But how many of us still end up kind of living for the weekends? Still looking for that kind of kickback and get a few drinks down here. That's what I'm itching for. Don't worry, it's Wednesday, it's hump day, you're nearer the weekend, that kind of mentality. We can all feel that way. We think, I'm looking for the weekend just to get kind of loose. And that's what he's doing here. He throws himself into it, heart and soul. Michael Stipe from REM said in one of his songs, I love this. It's such a clever line. He says, you want to go out Friday and you want to go forever. That is, for so many people, that's how they live. You want to go out Friday and you want to go forever. You just want to, that's where you want to be. You don't want to be Monday morning work. You don't want to be back into the kind of labor grindstone. We just want to escape. And so Solomon, he really investigates this fully. Now, we won't go into the detail of it. You can find it in 1 Kings chapter 4. But his parties were legendary. The provision for them was, just for one example, the provision for one day was 30 cors. Now, a core is 220 liters. So 30 cors means 6,600 liters of fine flour, 60 cors, so twice that of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. That's for a day's worth of celebrating. Now, if you do the calculations, you can get 35,000 people partying with that much food. Okay? If you've ever been to a hog roast, I reckon that can feed a couple hundred people, a decent-sized pig. Yeah, what you just described there is 35,000 people. So this is a bit bigger than Freshers Week. Yeah, this is a bit bigger than Mardi Gras or kind of your typical sort of hedonistic celebration. This is, let's get a whole city rocking for as long as we possibly can. He drank this to the dregs. No one outdid him in terms of how far he went exploring the pleasures of hedonism. And yet he found ultimately he was not particularly satisfied. Now, some of you may just think, well, of course not. Mere drunken partying is frivolous and meaningless. What did you expect? If you want something more worthwhile, you need to build something. Give yourself to kind of constructing something worthwhile, make something. And so that's what he does. That's what comes next. So he's been to the party. Secondly, we see paradise. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself, made myself gardens and parks, planted in them all kinds of trees. It's kind of like a new go at making Eden all over again. Let's create a paradise, gardens and parks and all this kind of stunning glory. And if you're wondering if he did it fully, well, the temple, which he built for God, took 7 years to build. Huge structure, coated with gold, one of the wonders of the ancient world. His house took 14 years to build. Twice that. You think, okay, this guy invested in this process. He even had these huge pools constructed to fill with water from which he could keep replenished his growing gardens and forests. I've seen Solomon's pools. You can still see them just outside the center of Jerusalem. They still have these vast, cavernous, empty pools now. And so he really went for it. Now, we may think, well, okay, maybe we can be tempted by hedonism, but we're not going to be tempted to construct a paradise. But for so many of us, it is that home project, that idea of creating the perfect home that does whisper to us, when this is finished, you'll be satisfied. Which tends to be why we need a few more things to paint to keep the lie alive. Yeah, because as long as I know there's a few more jobs, then I can keep believing that when they're done, I'll be satisfied. Fact is, when you get all that done, the soul still feels empty, potentially. Certainly in Solomon's experience, it was a greater paradise than we could ever imagine. You know, think of sort of Hampton Court would pale into comparison. Kind of those sorts of, I went to non-such mansion. Any of you ever been there? Just beautiful. And I was thinking of that as I was preparing. You did these balmy summer evenings, surrounded with people, drinking glasses of wine, playing croquet at a wedding reception. Think this is just lovely. Well, Solomon took that and multiplied it. And he's like, yeah, it was fun, but as we'll see. So he turns his attention thirdly to power. Verse 7, I bought male and female slaves and great herds and flocks, which speaks of power. It means that he can accomplish whatever he wants. He can buy and sell. He's gathered for himself silver and gold. Extraordinary volume of wealth. They reckon he would have had something in the region of at least 30,000 people in his personal entourage, his retinue, his company of people who did his every bidding. So really, he never has to do anything he doesn't want to do. Yeah, there's those ugly jobs you don't like. He didn't have to do any of them. He's got an army on, whatever you want done is done. The drop of a hat. He has power that most of us could never even dream of. I think, again, many of us can think, if I just get that promotion, that position, that place on the org chart, that'll tick my box. That'll do it for me. That'll satisfy me. Well, no one got higher on the org chart than Solomon. There was no one above him. As we see, that's the problem. There's no one above him. He's like, it's his life under the sun. It's not until he starts to consider, is there a God above that, a God beyond the sun, that any hope is going to come into the picture? He's at the top of the org chart, and it's like, okay. I think it was John D. Rockefeller who famously said, when someone said, do you think how much more money would really satisfy you? He had more money than whole countries. And his answer was just a little bit more. We were looking for that little bit more. It's just not quite enough. And you think, well, you've got more than whole countries. Well, yeah, I just still want more. He wanted more power. It says in Solomon's reign, silver became so common as to be considered worthless. Everything was made of gold. He's just phenomenally wealthy, as much power and influence as you could possibly ask for. So he turns to things that are a bit more immediate, and he jumps into, fourthly, pleasure. Verse 8, I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delights of the sons of man. Singers and sex, basically. The joys of exquisite music, the best musicians for hundreds of miles. You think about the joy you get out of listening to a great piece of music on your iPhone or whatever. Well, having, Stravinsky just there playing it for you. Having Coldplay just there, whatever your taste is. Yeah, just, he could bring them all in. Oh, I like that band. Yeah, I'll buy them. They'll play for me. Oasis would have done it happily for Solomon, no doubt. So he gathers these musicians. You think, that's what I'm lacking. Some real exposure to that kind of vibrant, live experience. Glastonbury times 10. It's like, I want this. So he does that. And then it's not just the music, it's the sex. The concubines is basically talking about mistresses, women who he had no obligation to do anything other than use. Effectively, that's how it worked. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. A man with 1,000 women at his beck and call. Now, while the wives may have been there for political alliances, at least to some extent, your neighbor's not going to attack you if you've married your neighbor's daughter, the neighboring country. But the concubines weren't for that. They were just to indulge his indulgences, his appetites. And so again, you could think, well, if I had that would satisfy. No one in history, I dare say, had more opportunity to explore that than Solomon. 1,000 women. I mean, it's comical. It's absurd. I mean, the guy had absolutely anything and everything you could possibly imagine. And so he says, I became great. So you could chuck popularity on the list as well. And surpassed all who were before me. And he says, whatever my eyes desired, I didn't keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. There was no point when he goes, all right, I should temper it down. No, he's just right, more. And he just keeps going. I just want to pause at this moment just to notice two things. He reaches a kind of sub-conclusion at this point. Firstly, he says this, I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. First conclusion is it was fun. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say, oh, and it was all terrible. Poor old Solomon. Oh, all the shallowness of hedonism, desperately miserable. No, actually, it was fun. And let's be real. Yeah, of course it was fun. It was fun. That's what it was. But the second thing to notice is that's all it was. He said, that was my reward. That's all it was. It was over for a brief moment. After a brief moment. Some of us I just want to get there. I just want to get to that holiday. And it's the first thing you start talking about on the way home from holiday, isn't it? The next holiday. Yeah, you just think, I just want to, that will do it. I'll be all right then. He did it all. He did all of that. He threw himself in. And so he comes to this point where he recognizes, yeah, it was pleasurable, of course it was, but that's it. That's the reward. That's all it was. And so he comes to this sort of mini assessment at verse 11, which really has the feel of the kind of morning after the night before, this kind of, I considered. This is the bit that most of us, we prefer not to. Some of you are not enjoying this sermon, forgive me. I know some of you are like, I don't want to think about this, you punk. Well, you're in church, so tough. But, it doesn't appeal to us, does it? You don't want to be confronted with, yeah, I know that there are, difficulties here. I know that just getting drunk isn't going to do it. So get off my case. Well, hear what he says, and hear why I won't get off your case just yet. He says, I considered. I had to consider it. I had to look at it. I had to think about it, because otherwise you're just being stupid. And he doesn't want to be stupid. So he says, I considered all my hands had done, all the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, striving after the wind. It's like trying to catch wind. Like, you caught it, I've got a box of wind. Like, you can't catch it. Who could shepherd the wind? Who could catch it? You can't get it. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. Now, the interesting thing is here, all of those phrases are peppered throughout the book, but at this point, he's gathered them all up in one, as if to say, that was the Hebrew is basically at this point. He's just, he gathers up all of his kind of frustrated assessments and puts them all together as if to say, I tried everything, won't satisfy. And it's important to recognize that it won't. And so he's hit with the bitterness of a hangover, really, at this point. Now, again, at this point, you could just say, well, okay, but he is being foolish. I mean, this is decadence. This is hedonism. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that hedonism isn't the answer. And so where does he turn his attention to next? Well, been to the party, paradise, power, pleasure. Fifthly, prudence, wisdom. Verse 12, I can turn to consider wisdom. You think, okay, now you're getting promising. Now you're talking about something a bit more smart. All right, good. You're not acting like some idiot who's, doesn't know how to handle Freshers Week. You're talking about something a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, this is a bit more promising. So he turns to consider wisdom and madness and folly, as it were, as alternatives. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what's already been done. Then I saw there is more gain in wisdom than folly, as there is more gain in light than darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head. The fool walks in darkness. It's basically, would you rather run across this room with your eyes open or with your eyes blindfolded? Well, obviously, our eyes open helps. Wisdom is going to make life better. It will help. And it's helpful for us just to acknowledge the scriptures repeatedly commend the value of wisdom. The Bible isn't saying just be thick and believe whatever it says and just don't worry about having a brain. That's not the message of this book. Yeah, otherwise, people like Augustine and Aquinas and Galileo and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Blaise Pascal and Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Soren Kierkegaard, Jonathan Edwards, Johann Sebastian Bach, George Friedrich Handel, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, Dietrich Bonhoeffer probably wouldn't have joined the thing. If you just think, intellect doesn't matter, then why are some of the brightest people in history thrilled with the discoveries that this tells us about? Why do their minds come alive when they get this book open? That's been my experience. So the Bible actually commends wisdom to us. Jesus says to his disciples, he doesn't say, be innocent as serpents and be wise as doves. He says it the other way around. He says, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. He wants his servants wise. All the way through the Bible, foolishness is condemned. It's castigated. Don't be a fool. Wisdom is lifted up consistently. Solomon was known as the wisest man who ever lived until Jesus shows up. Paul, undoubtedly an intellectual giant, perhaps was the greatest intellect of his era by a lot of people's reckoning. The Bible's full of, yes, wisdom has its place, certainly, and yet, and here's the important thing that we need to bear in mind, lest we think, oh, okay, having a sharp intellect is the answer, well, he bursts that bubble too. Yet I perceived, verse 14, the same event happens to all of them. You've got your Stephen Hawking and you've got your guy who can't spell his own name. Where do they both end up? In the ground. And if you were there at the graveyard that day and you observed the two funerals, they might not look that different. People tend to try and say nice things around the graveside. And even if someone's lived a life that wasn't particularly noteworthy, they'll say a few nice things. And, the undertaker looks at both situations and thinks, oh, they seem to both have very much the same destiny. Solomon says, for all my learning, it's not going to get me past the grave. It's like two men trying to jump up over the moon, and one of them takes a run up. You say, okay, well, you're going to go further than the other guy, but you're not going to get over the moon. And he's saying, all the wisdom, it helps, but ultimately it doesn't, we don't escape. We're still trapped with the same eventuality knocking at our door that will one day knock at all of our doors. And so he says, so I hated life. The wise dies just like the fool. At this point, he starts to get to a point and says it, I despaired. There's no point. Yeah, all right, I've explored all my resources. I've tried my best, but I've even thought about things really, really carefully, and yet still, no answer. So he decides to distract himself with busyness, throwing himself into the task of developing the 6P, a professional life, okay? So basically, at this point, he starts just working hard. Verse 18, I hated all my toil for which I toiled under the sun. He gives himself to just work. And for many of us, that is the primary focus of our lives. It's the context in which we find the strongest sense of purpose and identity. And yet for him, he finds even that wasn't fulfilling. Because, he says, I hated it, seeing that I must leave it to the man who'll come after me. And who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool. Yet he will be the master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So he gives up my heart. He says, I gave up my heart to despair. I toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill. I've got to leave it to be enjoyed by someone who didn't toil for it. This is vanity. What has a man to gain from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? All his days are full of sorrow. His work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart doesn't rest. It's also his vanity. It's like, I've worked and worked and worked and worked. And then you get to the point where you're kind of too old to enjoy what you've produced. And you start to see it's going to have to get handed over to this guy. What's he like? And then you find out that the guy who comes next is like, oh, that's fun. And you think, I created that. I worked really hard on that. It's like, yeah, well, whoops, I smashed it to bits. Okay, what's next? You think, all the things I've poured my heart and soul into. And the sad reality of Solomon's life is that his son was a fool. Rehoboam comes into the throne after Solomon, and within a generation has torn the kingdom apart. It's fallen apart. It falls into effectively civil war. The nation splits. It's like his son was a complete fool. So Solomon builds up this glorious thing, and it all falls like a flan. It all just collapses like a bad flan. Okay, so he's proved right. I work hard, it goes nowhere. The Bible says that work isn't a curse. It was there before the curse that comes in the fall when Adam and Eve disobey God. They already had work. Work isn't a curse, but work is cursed. It is a context in which we struggle against the curse. There's no such thing as a perfect job. It's like, that will be better, or maybe it'll be a bit better, but there'll still be elements of the curse there. That we fight against the curse that we find ourselves battling with wherever you turn. And so he finds, well, that's not done it either. And so we come, as we're heading here to the home stretch, to peaches. My final P. Now, you may not find peaches in the text, but stay with me. Okay, verse 24. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Now, there's an argument made that the better interpretation, the better translation would be for it to say, there is nothing inherent in a man than that he should eat or drink. The phrase they put in, there's nothing better, is actually not there in the Hebrew. They found it in other parts of the book. Phrasing is similar, so they put it in. But other people have said, no, actually, clearer translation, clearer interpretation of it is to say there's nothing inherent in a man that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil, i.e., humans are not made with an inbuilt capacity to find fulfillment. It's not inherent in a man. Like the next thing says, it's from the hand of God. Apart from him, who can eat or have enjoyment? Who can find fulfillment? As the next verse makes even more explicitly clear, but to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he's given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. So it's like we're born into a world when we're not born with the innate ability to find everything around us genuinely fulfilling. Pleasure, yes. True, deep fulfillment, no. That's only going to happen as we begin to bring God into the picture. So someone said it's like this. It's like a man being surrounded with stacks of cans of peaches, but he hasn't got a can opener. I'm surrounded with pleasures, opportunities, everything. They're all there, but no can opener. I can't get to it. I can't actually find the satisfaction. And here's the thing. Now, please, if you've heard nothing else I've said, please hear this. Here's what Solomon, having had an opportunity we will never get anywhere close to explore everything life can possibly offer us. Here's the conclusion he reaches. The can opener is going to happen as I step into fellowship with the God who made me. That's going to be the only way all of this starts to open up. And when it does, he starts to say, okay, now I can enjoy these things. See, the answer isn't, partying is naughty. Yeah, pleasures are bad. Power, oh, you should never want power. Yeah, that's not the answer. The answer is not that all these things are terrible in and of themselves, that we shouldn't work hard to have a professional life, that we shouldn't consider and develop prudence, that we shouldn't be looking for pleasures in life. God made all of those things for us. But here's the key. Here's the actual kind of heart of the whole matter in many ways. The conclusion isn't that these things are bad, but that without God, they're passing. They just don't last for very long. They're passing and impersonal. And so you enjoy the thing, but what your heart really wants is someone to thank and someone to do that with, rather than that was fun, now it's gone. If you do that in fellowship with the God who says, yeah, it was fun, I enjoyed making that, I enjoyed making it for you, one day you'll be in my presence where there'll be no curse and pleasures forevermore. That's what the Bible points to. Nowhere in the Bible are we commanded or instructed not to seek pleasure. Nowhere. We are instructed to seek it in the right places, not in places like pornography that after you've experienced a fleeting pleasure, it just kind of goes away and leaves you feeling bad and pulls you into more and more of an addiction. God doesn't want that for you because he loves you. See, I want my children to be able to enjoy drinking. Yeah, not yet, because, they're 12 and 9 and 4. But come the time, I hope that they will be able to enjoy having a bottle of wine with their friends and just have fun. What I don't want is for them to drink so much that the next day they feel embarrassed about what they did or said, or to have a horrible headache, because I love them. God filled the world with fun, joyful things because he loves us. But if we take those gifts and make them God, Solomon's discovery is they are rubbish gods. The real God is a glorious God who filled a glorious world full of fun stuff. And when you know him as a friend, all of that comes alive. When you discover he loves me, you can enjoy food and drink. That's one of the applications of the sermon this week. Have a really good meal at some point. Okay, that's what you're commanded to do by Scripture. Eat a good steak, drink some good wine. Enjoy it because God made it for you as a gift to demonstrate his love. But if you won't receive it as a gift from the God who loves you, it will only be this much and then it will go. It will be kind of fun and then it's gone. If you find, this is a gift from the one who loves me, then the whole thing starts to come alive. then you start to discover, oh, wow, there's a reason I find all of this so kind of fascinating and intoxicating, and a reason why I find it so frequently baffles me and disappoints me when I get too excited about the gifts instead of discovering that the giver is more glorious than any of his gifts and gives all of them to me as a pure evidence of his friendship and kindness. It's a wonderful thing. When people start taking the Bible seriously, in communities where that starts to happen, it's interesting how often the arts start to flourish. Music starts to come in. Martin Luther took the Bible extremely seriously. He's famous for elevating the position of music in his society. God gave us music, enjoy it. God gave us wine. God gave us marriage. God gave us sex. He made it. He didn't turn around and look back at Adam and Eve. What on earth are you doing? No. It was his invention. This is not, they didn't do something wrong at this point. People, it's terrible, it makes me so angry when you see the Bible misrepresented. People say, oh, the fools, because they were doing naughty things and having sex. You think, no, that's not what the fools is about at all. God creates us with appetite and aptitude for pleasure and joy. But when we enthrone those things as gods, they spoil and corrupt our lives. When we put them in their place and say thank you to God, then you've got some real joy that can begin to spill into your life. He says he gives it to the one who pleases him. Now, last thing, just to start drawing this to a close. Some of you at that point think, oh, blow. So he gives it to the one who pleases him, whereas the sinner has the job of gathering stuff up, which doesn't sound fun. Just going around gathering up, the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. Some of us read that bit and think, well, then that's me out. Because I don't please God. The things that come out of my mouth, the things that I think, the things that I do, I don't please it. I'm not a God-pleasing individual. I don't. So, sorry, I bow out. Sounds fun, but no, thank God. I don't please God. Solomon knows that. He says that in the same book. Chapter 7, verse 20, he says, surely there's not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. He knows we don't please God. So you think, oh, well, then we're truly stuffed. There isn't even a can opener. That's why, 1,000 years later, a new son of David comes into the scene. That's why when Jesus arrives, and at his baptism, a bit like this morning with Max here, at his baptism, God the Father can no longer contain himself. And as Jesus comes up out of the water, it says a voice spoke, saying, this is my son, whom I love, in whom I'm well pleased. I'm pleased with him. That's before Jesus has done any miracles, preached any sermons. He said, it's my son, and I'm pleased with him. The one who pleases God suddenly steps into the picture. And then it says, God made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, done no sin. He pleased God to be sin for us on the cross. Why is the one who pleases God on the cross? Because he takes all of my wickedness, all my sin, all my lust, all my stupidity, all my rotten horribleness, all my shove off God, I'm in charge, no to your rules, all that stuff we have. He takes all of that and he takes the consequences of that sin on the cross on our behalf. He did it for us. He steps in, takes that. God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we can become the righteousness of God. We get to swap places. We get to know what it is to say to God, Father, and to know that he says, I'm pleased with you. You think, why? Because I did something? No, but because I've hidden you in my son. I'm always pleased with my son, and now you're in him. Christianity has nothing to do with trying to keep a bunch of boring, outdated moral commands. It has everything to do with discovering that God is gloriously kind, washes away sin, invites us into fellowship so that the whole world starts to come alive to us. That's what he's offered to us. That's what he makes available. It's absolutely extraordinary. C.S. Lewis put it this way: the Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God. The Son of God became a man to enable men and women to become sons of God, sons and daughters of God, brought into the family of God. So Max is a clue. He's not going to suddenly, he's arrived. Everything will be better now. That is wonderful. It's special. He's not the answer, but he's a clue. He's a pointer, because when you see the love of a father and a son, when you see the love and the joy, it's a big hint. At the heart of creation. At the heart of all that there is of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the Father loves the Son, and the Son loves the Father. And the invitation is, come into that. I'll finish with one last story. Some of you are thinking, you said you would finish a while ago. Yes, forgive me. Okay, last thing. One last story. I wonder how many of you may have seen Chariots of Fire. Beautiful story of when Eric Liddell, who was a runner, who loved Jesus, his life was contrasted with a man called Harold Abrams, who was not a Christian, didn't claim any kind of relationship with God in particular. And the story, beautifully told, I think it got the Oscar for Best Picture, fantastic film, you must see it if you haven't. The story shows their trajectories up towards this kind of climax of them both running in the Olympics. And both of them have to kind of stand and compete. They're actually, in the end, they're in separate races. And Harold Abrams says before the race, he said, I used to be afraid to lose, but now I'm afraid to win. Because I've got 10 seconds in which time to justify my existence. If I win, then I'm something. If I don't, I'm nothing. And so he's kind of got this huge pressure. Now he wins, and when he's won afterwards, he's kind of disconsolate, doesn't know what to do with himself. He says, I was afraid to lose, now I'm afraid to win, because if I win, what if it doesn't produce the goods? What if it doesn't give what I'm hunting for? And sure enough, he's drunk with his coach afterwards, and he's kind of he's in a mess, because I did it, but what was it? You contrast that then with Eric Liddell, who, while he's pursuing his Olympic gold, his sister, who knows he's supposed to be a missionary to China, says to him, Eric, when will it stop? It's like you get so into this running. And his response to her is beautiful. He says, Jenny, God made me for a purpose, for China, but he also made me fast. And I run. Pleasure. He made me for a purpose for China, but he made me fast. And when I run, feel his pleasure. And it shows as he runs and his head comes up. And this ecstasy upon his face as he knows this is not about winning a race. It's like, God's cheering me on. And apparently members of his family who saw the film said that the actor, he captured it so well, he'd run with his face upturned. But they said actually, in reality, it was often higher up than the actor showed, oftentimes running off the track. It's just like, woohoo! Oh, whoops, come back on. He's just like, this guy's happier because all the joys that were available in life have come alive because now there's a God who gives pleasure. It's please just hear me. He opens it all up. So come to Alpha. Come back to church. Discover, explore it, open a Bible, ask, okay, God, if you're really real, if you're the one who makes this transient, fun, but ultimately unfulfilling world come alive and prove actually fulfilling, I'm interested in that. He's very interested in you. We've been praying for you.